The lonely girl and her piano had only lived in the city for a week. Everything around her felt strange and unfamiliar. The streets were loud, the buildings tall, and the people busy. But in the middle of all that noise, her small apartment stayed silent. She was just a quiet girl who spoke little, kept to herself, and missed her old life. She didn't have friends here. There was no one to talk to. She didn't even go out much. Her father worked long hours, often returning late, too tired to say much. That's why, every night, when the clock hit 8, she would walk to the corner of the living room. There stood an old wooden piano, slightly out of tune, but full of memories. The piano had belonged to her mother before she passed away. The girl would often sit beside her, listening closely as her mother's fingers danced over the keys. Those soft, peaceful melodies used to fill their home with warmth. Now, the girl played those same songs alone. It was her only way to feel close to her mother again. She didn't know if she played well or not, never had lessons, but the sound came from her heart, and somehow that was enough. Each note held a piece of her sadness, her silence, her longing. Every evening she played quietly, as if whispering into the night one night. As she was finishing a soft tune, she noticed something outside the window. A shadow stood across the street near the tall tree. She froze, her hands resting on the keys. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood still and listened. Then, just as quietly, the shadow walked away into the dark. The next night it happened again. She played a slow melody, and the figure returned, still silent at first. It scared her, but over time, it began to feel normal. She didn't know who the person was. Maybe a neighbor, maybe someone passing by. But whoever it was, they listened to her music without a word. No claps, no calls, just quiet presence. And somehow, that made her feel less alone. Night after night she played, she began to try new melodies. Just to see if the figure would react, sometimes she played something joyful. Other times, something deep and sad. The figure always came, always stayed, always listened. She started looking. Forward to 8 p.m., it became more than just piano time. It became the only moment of her day when someone, anyone, felt close. She didn't understand why it mattered, but it did. It was like she had a secret listener. Someone who understood her in silence. She never told her father. She didn't even tell herself out loud how much it meant. But when she played with more heart, more feeling, because she knew someone was hearing every note, someone who stayed even when the world outside moved on. It was strange, she thought, how someone she didn't know could make her feel seen. All without a word, just by being there, just by listening. And so, the lonely girl kept playing. In a new city, in a quiet room, on an old piano, the music flowed. The shadow watched, and for the first time in a long time. She didn't feel completely invisible. She wasn't sure where this story was going. She didn't even know if she wanted to find out, but something told her deep inside that this was the beginning of something different, something quiet. Yes, but something meaningful. She glanced once more at the tree across the street. The shadow was there, as always, standing still, arms by their side, face hidden. And as she played her final note of the night, she allowed herself a small, gentle smile, whoever they were. They were listening, and tonight, that was enough. A shadow at the window that night. Something changed. The wind had picked up, shaking the leaves outside. But the girl still sat at her piano, her fingers gently touching the keys. She played a new tune. One she hadn't played before. It wasn't from memory. It came from feeling raw and real. Each note drifted softly into the night air. She didn't look outside, but she could feel it. The presence, the listener. Standing near the same tree across the street, but tonight, there was something different about the silence. It felt closer, heavier. Almost like the music had reached deeper into someone's heart. When she finished playing, she slowly stood up and walked toward the window, pulling the curtain just a little. She peeked through the glass. There, under the pale streetlight, stood the same figure, but now she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small paper bag placed carefully. On the ground beneath the tree, she blinked, unsure what it meant. Was it for her? Was it trash? Or just coincidence? She stepped back, heart thumping softly, unsure whether to feel fear or curiosity. The figure turned slowly, looked once toward her window, then disappeared into the shadows. No words, no gestures, just quiet. Departure? The next morning, she went outside. No one was around, with cautious steps. She walked to the tree. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the bag. Inside was something simple. A chocolate bar and a tiny folded note. The note. Read. Your music helps me breathe again. Thank you. There was no name, no explanation, just that one line. She stood there quietly, reading it again and again, not knowing what to feel. But knowing it mattered. That day at school, she couldn't focus. She kept thinking about the stranger, who they were, why they listened, and what pain they carried. She had never thought her music mattered to anyone, not even herself. But now, she knew it had reached someone in a way words couldn't. That evening, she sat at the piano earlier than usual. She placed the note gently near the keys and stared at it for a long moment. Then, without overthinking, she began to play again, this time slower, softer, like she was telling a story through. Each note, she poured her heart into the keys, hoping the listener would hear every silent word. And across the street, hidden by the gentle sway of tree branches, a figure stood still, hands in pockets, head slightly bowed. Listening, breathing, remembering, the girl no longer wondered if she was alone in the world. Somehow, without meeting, without speaking, she and the shadow had started a quiet friendship, built not with voices, but with sound. And though they knew nothing of each other's names or faces, they knew what mattered, the comfort of being understood in silence. She didn't know what the next night would bring, but for the first time since moving to this new place, she wasn't afraid of the dark outside her window, because now it held a secret, a stranger who listened, and quietly began to heal alongside her. Let me know when you're ready for part 3. I'll make it even more emotionally deep and uniquely engaging, keeping the audience hooked. Shall I continue? You said. Start with part 3. More unique and interesting, Kat said. Absolutely. Here is a more unique and emotionally captivating version of part 3. Notes of curiosity, continuing from part 2, written in simple, natural English. In a third-person, human-centered voice, with full stops replaced by commas for smooth voiceover and full YouTube policy compliance. Part 3. Notes of curiosity the next few nights. She played with more heart than ever before, but now, something new was growing inside her, curiosity. She had accepted the stranger's quiet presence at first, but now she needed to know why. Why did this person keep coming back? Why her music? What was it that held them under that tree night after night? She didn't have the courage to speak, not yet, but she wanted to ask. So she did it the only way she knew, through a note. Soft question written in neat handwriting on a small piece of paper. She placed it gently on the inside of her window, facing out, just above the piano. The words were simple. Why do you come here every night? Then she sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. Her melody was slower tonight, filled with quiet hope and nervous energy. As her music drifted into the air, she wondered if the stranger would even see the message. When she finished the last note, she peeked through the curtain. The figure stood there, just like always, still and silent, but this time facing the window more directly. The girl stepped back quickly, heart racing. The feeling was strange, not fear, but something deeper. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but when she woke up the next morning, the note on the window was gone. In its place, a new one had been carefully taped. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled it inside. The reply was written in careful, almost shaky handwriting. It read, "Your music reminds me of someone I loved once. Someone I lost but never forgot." Just one sentence, but it landed like a heavy breath on her chest. She read it again and again, her fingers tightening around the paper. There were no names, no details, but she didn't need them. She could feel the sadness in the words and the weight of memory behind them. That night, she didn't just play. She responded with her music. She chose a melody her mother used to hum while doing chores around the house. It was soft, familiar, full of gentle warmth. She imagined the listener standing beneath the tree, closing their eyes, remembering something far away after the song ended. She didn't look outside. She just sat there quietly, hoping the message had been heard, not through the window, not through paper, but through sound, raw and honest. The kind that connects people without needing anything more. The next evening, another note appeared. This one said, "I used to sit by the window and listen to her play. She's gone now, but when you play, I see her again." The girl didn't know what to say. So again she let the piano speak. Her fingers moved slowly, each key pressed with care. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a conversation, one without voices, but filled with understanding. She started writing back short notes before each night's performance. Things like, "I'm sorry for your loss," or "Thank you for listening." The replies were always brief, always heartfelt, but one thing was clear: they were both healing, slowly, together. Though the girl never saw the stranger's face, she began to picture them, maybe older, with tired eyes and a kind smile, someone who carried pain like she did, but chose not to hide from it anymore. Someone who found comfort not in words, but in shared silence each night. Their invisible bond grew stronger, the notes on the window, the music in the air, the still figure across the street, all part of something delicate and beautiful. And though the city outside kept moving fast, in that small corner of the world, two souls were learning how to feel again, all because one played, and the other listened. A reply in silence that night. The piano sat quiet for a long time. The girl stood by the window, her hands resting on the windowsill. She hadn't played yet, but her heart was already full. She had read the last note over and over, the one where the stranger spoke of someone they used to sit with. The thought of that silent memory stayed with her. It made her feel closer to someone she had never even met. Outside, the streetlights hummed gently, and just like always, the figure returned. Still, steady, patient, they didn't need to knock or speak. Their presence had already said enough. She slowly sat at the piano, but this time she didn't rush to play. She placed a fresh piece of paper on the window glass. It read, "I think we both lost someone music can't replace. Maybe it helps us remember." Then with a deep breath, she pressed the first key. The notes came out slower tonight, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted each one to feel like a message. She played with care, letting her sadness mix with quiet hope. As the melody floated out into the night, she imagined it wrapping around the stranger like a blanket. She didn't look outside. She didn't need to. Somehow she could feel it. They were listening. And more than that, they were feeling when the final note faded. She just sat there, eyes closed for the first time. Her silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something had been shared without needing words, like the kind of understanding that only exists between two people carrying invisible pain. The next morning, the girl woke up early. Sunlight poured into the room through the window, and taped neatly beside the piano was a new note. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but it said more than enough. "When she died, I stopped listening to music, then I heard yours. Now I wait for it every night." She sat on the floor holding the note. Her chest tightened, her eyes began to burn. She had no idea what the stranger had been through, but now she knew this wasn't just about music anymore. This was about healing, quiet, gentle healing. That came from knowing you're not alone. That night, she wrote something new. Not a question, not a reply, just something real. She placed the note on the window and sat at the piano before she played. She looked out into the empty street and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." The note she left said, "I used to play only for my mother. Now I play for you too." Her hands found the keys again, this time. She played one of her mother's favorite songs, a soft lullaby she hadn't touched since the funeral. It hurt to play it, but it also brought her mother's face back. Smiling gently, she imagined the stranger remembering someone too. Two people sitting in two different memories, but somehow sharing the same moment, and outside, beneath the tree, the figure remained, still, silent, respectful. No words spoken, no names exchanged, but every note between them spoke louder than voices ever could. The unexpected connection it had been, too. Weeks since the first note appeared, but somehow it felt like the stranger had always been part of her nights. The girl never saw their face, never heard their voice, yet every evening when she pressed the piano keys, she knew exactly who she was playing for. She stopped counting the days since she moved, because something had shifted. Not outside, but inside her. She still didn't have any friends at school, still came home to an empty apartment. But when the clock neared 8, she no longer felt alone. Each night brought a new exchange, a melody from her hands, a note taped to the window in return. They never asked personal questions, never spoke of names or places, but through music and words, something honest had formed. Not a friendship in the usual sense, but a quiet bond, deep, silent, and real. One evening, she wrote something different. Just a sentence, unsure how it would be received. It said, "You help me feel seen." She hesitated before pressing it to the glass, then sat down and played a warm, hopeful tune. The next night, she found a folded note on the windowsill, carefully placed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside read, "You help me remember I'm still here." She read the words 3 times before placing it inside her drawer. Somehow it felt too important to leave lying out. The girl began to play differently after that. Not louder, not faster, but with more feeling, like every note carried a message. Sometimes joy, sometimes pain, sometimes simple understanding. One night, she tried something new. She stopped mid-song and walked to the window, lifting the curtains slowly. She looked across the street. The shadow was there as always, but this time it raised a hand, just slightly a wave. Not too big, not too small. She froze, then lifted her own hand in return, 2 small gestures across the quiet space. But they carried more weight than any conversation. She stepped back to the piano and played again, but now her heart was lighter. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone saw her. Not for her looks, not for her words, but for something deeper. Her music, her feelings, her silence. Days passed and their pattern continued. No one else in her life noticed the change, but inside, she was waking up, piece by piece. It wasn't that her pain had vanished, it was just that someone was sitting with it beside her, quietly. From across the street that week, it rained for 3 nights straight. She still played, even though her fingers felt cold and stiff. She wondered if the stranger would still come in the wet weather, and they did. A dark shape under an umbrella. Unmoving, soaking in every note, something about that moved her deeply. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it in her chest. The truth that people don't always need words to care. Sometimes just showing up is everything, and that's what the stranger did. Every night, without fail, they stood there and listened. And in doing so, helped her feel alive again. The night it rained, the sky had been heavy all day. Clouds hung low over the rooftops, thick and gray. By late evening, the rain had started. Soft at first, then steady. The kind of rain that made the world feel quiet and far away. She sat by the piano, watching droplets race down the window glass for the first time in weeks. She hesitated. She wondered if the stranger would come tonight. Would they really stand in the rain just to hear her play? Part of her said no, no one would do that. But another part hoped they would, not because she needed attention, but because their presence had become part of her song. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and began to play the notes. Came out slower tonight, like they were walking through puddles. Every sound felt like a question. Are you there? Do you still hear me? Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the trees. She dared a glance through the curtain. But the space under the tree was empty, just rain falling steadily on the pavement. Her heart sank, just a little. Maybe tonight was too much. Maybe it was too cold. Too wet, too heavy. Still, she finished the song, then sat in silence. The room felt a little colder, not from the weather, but from the missing presence. She left a note on the window anyway. It said, "I missed you tonight. Hope you're okay." The next day, she rushed home from school, not for dinner, not for rest, but for one small hope. She pulled back the curtain. And there it was, a note taped carefully, just like always. Jay grabbed it with both hands, her heart racing. It read, "The rain was heavy, but I listened from across the street. I didn't want to leave. I just didn't want you to worry." She read it 3 times before sitting down. Something in her chest tightened, not with pain, but with something else. It was strange. How deeply she felt connected to someone she had never even spoken to, but that's what this was. Not just music, not just notes. It was care, quiet, and invisible, but real. That night, she didn't wait for the clock. She sat down early. She wrote a message that simply said, "Thank you for not giving up on my songs." Then she played one of her softest pieces, one she hadn't played in a long time. It was slow, warm, and full of quiet strength. She didn't need to see the stranger to know they were there, somewhere in the shadows. Still listening, still healing, the rain came back again the next night, but this time she didn't wonder. If they'd come, she knew they would, because now their silence had become a promise, a quiet reply, in rhythm with every note she played. And no matter what the weather said, their song wasn't over yet. The truth revealed the days began to feel shorter, not because the sun was setting earlier, but because she was counting time differently now. Every moment led to that quiet hour, the time when her fingers met the keys and a silent listener stood in the dark just to hear her heart unfold. But one night something felt different. The sky was clear, the air still. Yet the tree across the street stood empty. She waited a few extra minutes, then a few more. But the shadow never appeared. She still played soft and unsure. Each note carried the weight of a question. "Are you okay? Are you coming back? Can you still hear me?" When she finished, the silence in the room felt heavier than usual. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses down on your chest. She left a note on the window like always, but this one said only, "I hope you're safe," the next morning. She didn't rush to the window. She didn't want to be disappointed again. But something told her to look, and when she did, there it was, a new envelope, slightly damp from dew. Taped neatly on the glass, she opened it slowly. The handwriting was the same, but the message inside was longer this time. It wasn't just a reply, it was a story, a truth that had been waiting in silence all this time. "I never meant to be seen," it began. "I used to walk past your building by accident until the night I heard your song. It stopped me in my tracks. Because it sounded like something I'd lost. My daughter used to play every evening until the day we lost her in a house fire 3 years ago. Since then, I haven't touched music. Haven't stood still. Haven't listened to anything until your piano brought her back." She froze, her breath caught between the lines of that letter. "You probably don't know what your music means to someone like me. I never planned to stay, but I did, again and again, because every note felt like a memory being returned. You've helped me more than you'll ever know, and now I think I can let her go in peace." She sat down on the floor. Letter still in her hand, the words echoed in her chest, filling all the quiet spaces that had lived inside her since her mother passed. Two strangers, connected not by faces or names, but by shared grief and the unspoken language of music. She didn't cry right away. She just sat there, letting the truth settle in. Not everyone comes into your life to stay forever. Some people arrive just long enough to remind you that you're not alone. That night she placed one final note on the window, said, "Thank you for listening. I will keep playing, for her and for you." When she sat at the piano, her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Love, memory, healing. She played the softest song she knew. A lullaby not meant for sleep, but for peace, and somewhere out there. Even if he never returned, she knew he heard it, because some songs don't need an audience to matter. They just need someone brave enough to play them. The last song, "The Tree Across the Street," stood empty for days. No shadow, no still figure, no notes left behind. Just wind moving softly through the branches, and yet every evening she still sat at her piano. It's not because she expected anyone to be listening, but because something in her had changed. She no longer played to escape the silence. She played to fill it with memory, with warmth, with meaning. The notes she once played in sadness now carried something more. Not happiness exactly, but peace. A quiet knowing that her music had touched someone else's broken world, and in return, helped her own begin to heal. One evening, while cleaning around the room, she found the drawer filled with notes. All of them, the first one, the short replies. The story that broke her heart and rebuilt it again. She sat with them on the floor, reading each slowly, smiling at some, crying at others, but mostly feeling grateful for something most people never experience: a connection made entirely of truth, without ever needing a name. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again. Maybe their paths were only meant to cross for a short time. But she knew with certainty that what they shared was real. That night, she didn't place a note on the window. She didn't look outside. She simply sat at the piano, let out a breath, and began to play. The song was soft and full of light. A goodbye without sadness. A thank you wrapped in every key. She played it for him, for his daughter, and for her own mother. She played it for every moment of silence they shared, for every night someone stood in the dark just to feel something again, and for every time she thought no one was listening. When someone truly was, as the final note faded into the room, she sat quietly for a long moment, then stood, stepped away from the piano, and walked toward the window. She didn't open the curtain this time. She just rested her hand on the glass, not looking out, but feeling the night still calm and full of something bigger than sound. And though the tree outside was empty, though the stranger had gone, she smiled, because she knew their story wasn't lost. It was tucked into every note she'd ever play from now on, a part of her music, a part of her healing, forever.